Thank you, everyone, to another edition of Moya Talks. Today we have Ryan Allison joining us from Phoenix. Ryan is a graphic designer and musician located in Phoenix, based in Phoenix, and he's from the Diné, the Navajo people, the Navajo Nation, and he's going to talk to us about his experience as a designer and musician. Thank you very much, Ryan, for accepting the invitation.
Oh, of course. Thank you for having me.
Ryan, will we start by learning a little bit of our guest's background and inspirations? So, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Ryan Allison. I come from a town called Fort Defiance, Arizona, and that's located on the Navajo Nation. I grew up there. I lived a bit in Montana, in Bozeman, Montana, for when I was in my teenage years, but I was born and raised on the Navajo reservation. And I've lived a couple places around Arizona, but Phoenix has been my home for the last 6 years. And I'm currently a student at Arizona State University, studying their graphic design. Uh,
How do
um,
you how
oh,
do
go
you
ahead.
start or how do you fall in love with design?
Um, I think just being Diné or Navajo, it's kind of inherently all around. Um, you're constantly surrounded by, Navajo designs, like whether it's a basket design or some sort of sand painting motif. It's everywhere, and being Native American or being indigenous, there's intention behind every motif, every design element. So, being that there's no separation between really anything as far as like physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional aspects, including art, just being surrounded by it is probably what drove me into it. And I guess like on a more like simpler level, I just used to love drawing. I used to draw, like Snoopy and Charlie Brown characters all the time when I was younger, just like trying to copy it. And growing up, I never stopped. Like even in high school, I was still trying to draw Snoopy and whatever else.
Are there other designers or artists that inspire you growing up?
Yeah, there's a lot. One that really inspired me was my brother's friend. His name is Carl Jim. He currently is the creative director for all the casinos, the Navajo Nation casinos, located across Arizona. But seeing him, working with my brother, and at the time he was like in school and like no one knew who he was, but he was drawing on a computer, and I thought that was like amazing. And one day I saw something that he was drawing on a billboard. So I remember thinking like, "Whoa, I remember seeing that like a couple months ago, and now it's on a billboard." And that blew my mind. So that is what inherently drew me to graphic design. And I also wanted to make apparel, like t-shirts and things like that. I never did, but that's kind of what drew me. Like the very first thing that drew me was I really liked t-shirts, basically.
That leads me to my other question. You talk about how being amazed by computer design. How do you think the new generation navigates this intersection between tradition and modernity?
That's a good question. Uh, I know I'm pretty amazed by like technology and where how far it's come. I have a little niece that's I think she's 7, but she's teaching me how to draw things, and it's all things that she's learned from her iPad and like YouTube. You know, she if you've seen some of my art, it's sort of like Western based. So there's a lot of like horses and like some of those elements, and she was teaching me how to draw a horse, measuring things like proportionally, and that was things that she learned from YouTube. So it's kind of interesting to see, I guess, this newer generation utilizing those tools. Because when I was younger, it's like I had to figure out how to draw like just on my own. You know what I mean? And it probably took me a lot longer because no one was teaching me or telling me how to do things. And as I'm sorry I forgot your question, but basically that's what I guess like the traditional and like contemporary parts meeting each other. It's pretty interesting as far as how technology can shape that, especially like with computers and like iPads and everything. Like you don't really need, of course, I would love everyone to use a pen and paper, pencil and paper to draw, but you don't really need those things anymore. It's kind of weird to think like even when you're doing sketches for a client, sometimes they'd rather see the sketches that you've done on an iPad rather than like your sketchbook, just because it's faster and it's more convenient. Is it better? I'm not sure, but I just know that's like the that's the place we're moving toward.
I'm going to digress a little bit from the planned questions. This is very interesting. I don't know if you saw David Hockney's last exposition.
I don't think so.
He's working exclusively with digital art made with
Okay.
his iPad.
Hmm.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then all these apps are free. Like, kids start working with 3D renderings at a really, really young age, and by the time they're my age, they could become experts at 3D rendering and they'll know how to animate and things like that. And it's all just from YouTube and like an iPad. It's interesting.
Is there a clash with more traditional forms of art in your community?
I'm not sure if clash is the right word, but there is definitely a mixing of the two. And I think it's generational because I consider myself like the last of I consider myself the last generation before the internet. So I'm 30 years old, and on the res, things are a little slower than like the rest of the world, at least the rest of the USA. So I didn't have internet or access to internet until I was like 15 or 16, and I didn't own a cell phone until I was like in college. So I think there is a generational gap between technology and how it's utilized in terms of traditional forms of art. And again, it's hard to say like, is it good or is it bad? And inherently a Navajo kid drawing on an iPad is inherently making Navajo art because they are Navajo person. Are they painting with like real tools, or I don't even know what's considered real anymore, but like are they painting with acrylic or oil on canvas or things like that? No. But I mean, Navajo people weren't doing that anyway. Indigenous people seem to make art uh, out of necessity in terms of spirituality or whether it was a tool, um, something like that. Like if it was something for prayer, and it's hard to view it in those terms. It's also hard to turn your brain because it's not art for art's sake. It's not like a Eurocentric European style of art where they're making things oil on canvas or it's cast in bronze where it's made to last forever. Indigenous people didn't make stuff to last forever. We made stuff because we needed to make stuff. And I'm not sure if there's a clash, but I know there's a mixing of the two, and I think it's great, honestly,
It's
because
fascinating because this identity element that you're talking about, this necessity, also goes into the debate about artificial intelligence, right? The recent debate about creating art for artificial intelligence. Where is the tool and where is the creative process really taking place?
yeah, the thing I would argue about artificial intelligence is it's and like okay, with artificial intelligence, you have to tell it what to make. You don't you don't say make something and it makes something. You have to say make something that looks like Southwestern art, and it'll make something that look like Southwestern art based on what it's already knows what Southwestern art is. So, I mean, again, my argument is just like, is that that's definitely not creative because it's kind of taking whatever it knows. And, as indigenous people, it's like we talked about necessity and how there's no separation between science, art, spirituality. It's all one thing. And as even from like indigenous folks from Mexico could easily say the same thing, where it's all one thing, nothing's ever separated. And I think that's a really big point that's missed when studying or looking at indigenous art and design.
That's super. All right. So, in your opinion, where is this going right now among the Navajo people? This intersection with technology, where is it taking you as an artist, as a creator?
Well, it's definitely helped me. I honestly think it's another medium to preserve and maybe even learn about traditional forms of art. Um, you can kind of mix and match with the help of a computer of all aspects of design. And I'm going to university right now, and we're a Swiss design-based school. So all the instructors that I work with went to school in Switzerland and Sweden to learn that style of graphic design. And I think mixing the two concepts ultimately will make me a better designer because I can pick and choose, aspects from the different ideas and concepts that come from both Eurocentric and indigenous design. And there's a couple folks in my class that could easily say the same thing. Like I have a friend who's Vietnamese, and I have a friend that I have friends that are from Mexico. And I think we hear the word decolonize quite a bit, kind of as a slogan, like decolonize your mind, decolonize this, decolonize that. But like at the very essence, that's really, really, really hard to do. That's extremely difficult. So I think with the help of learning this like Swiss design, like super rigid, structured, grid-oriented design, learning that has helped me decolonize my brain in terms of what is Eurocentric design and what is indigenous design. So ultimately going forward, for me personally, I think I'll become the better graphic designer because I can differentiate the two as well as like mix and match the two.
Yeah, very much what you produce and your influences are heavily inspired in 1960s, 70s Western culture. So through this process, sorry, I'm babbling a little bit, but it's really interesting what you say, so I'm real time processing it. And through this process of inspiration in more Western traditional art, in more Western traditional figures and what you produce, where do you think is taking you? You say it's going to be you're learning this rigid design, these grids. How those intersect? Like what you actually produce right now?
um, just so I understand your question, how does this intersect like I guess like the indigenous design and the Swiss grid or anything like that?
Yeah, I want to try to understand a little bit deep down what you're trying to say. Like I understand you have this structure, and this structure allows you to understand what you are producing and how it is different, and the techniques are different. But in terms of when you really sit down and work, how does that come into life?
Okay. I think just to shed some light on some context, as a Navajo person in Navajo art, or at least in Navajo culture in general, but art specifically, there is structure to it. There is a rigidness to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to look at a Navajo sand painting, it's super intricate. But I think the one huge difference is when there's a mistake, you don't cover it up. You don't fix it. Maybe to an extent you fix it. but you kind of leave it what the stroke was or the intention. And that's the approach I take with my design. And you know, in Navajo culture, there's even points where you specifically make a mistake because that tells you as the artist and just the audience in general that nothing is perfect. Nothing is 100% perfect. So you leave the mistakes in there. You leave, of course, if it's a huge mistake, you have to fix that. But if it's a tiny mistake that no one will catch, that you as an artist know that you messed up there, you can leave that in there. And that goes with anything. That goes with like dances, songs. There's always something that's like a little bit out of the ordinary. And that's the approach I take. And that's what I don't find in, the Swiss design that I do, because that is very minute, very detailed, very like intention based. Not that indigenous art is not intention based, because there's intention. I would even argue there's more intention because every stroke, every color means something. And that means something spiritually or emotionally or symbolically. But that's the approach I take. So just to dive into the process, maybe if I'm working and I make a mistake or an accident, I won't necessarily fix it. I'll just kind of keep it there, knowing that I messed up there and nothing's perfect.
I don't want to digress anymore, but you mentioned the word minute.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who did the miniaturas, the minute drawers of the Middle Ages, they were copyists, right? And they were trying to do an exact, perfect copy of the document. So it goes very deep, what you say.
Right.
You mentioned right before the interview, we're talking a little bit, and you said that you would like to make a design firm in the future. So one of my questions was going to be, where do you see in the future as a designer? And if you could please elaborate on that idea of making your own firm.
Like I mentioned earlier, there aren't a lot of indigenous based firms. And I honestly think graphic design itself, or like the study of it, is a bit an untapped market in the indigenous world. At least the Eurocentric values of it, because my people and indigenous folks have been graphic designers, or they've been communicating visually forever. And my people specifically, we've never had a phonetic written language. We always communicated through symbols and icons. And if that's not visual communication, I don't know what is, But to have an all indigenous firm in the future, I think would be beneficial because one, it shows people, or it shows, I think, the youth or younger folks the practice of it and the study of it will inherently make everything better in terms of preserving and even maybe evolving language, the alphabet, shapes, colors, design, things like that. And excuse me, I think there's also an element of culture sensitivity. If you were to ask some people who are not, not Navajo, can you make me Navajo inspired art or Navajo art? They're going to take like stereotypical motifs of what's considered Southwestern or what's like, elements of that and not know the intention and meaning behind it. And as an indigenous person, that's something I really hold, in high regard, that there has to be some sort of knowledge, culture sensitivity when you're working with these things. And luckily, I've gotten some clients out of that just because, I've worked with people who maybe hired or outsourced work to other people overseas just because it was the cheapest option. But they're almost appropriating my people's art because it's Southwestern or because it's Western. And some people or some clients have realized like that's not the right way to do it. What we need to do is hire a real indigenous person to do the art. And again, thankfully, I've gotten gigs out of that just from being uh, from companies wanting to do better, basically. And I think that's really important. That's like another huge aspect that is important when discussing these things.
And thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor because we're well into the interview. And staff, please go ahead, ask your questions. Which takes a little bit, right?
I have a quick question. Um, the way I see it is, and I could be totally wrong, but I mean, all of us, but a lot of us in our firm are from different cultures as well. So I think as professionals practicing a profession, having being multicultural makes you different. And by different, it makes you sometimes interesting, and the way you can work within your culture and other cultures and bend rules on both and combine, I think it makes a much richer product. So I really am very interested in what you said, that understanding the two systems, if you will, and then having to navigate both or go one side or the other. I think it makes you more powerful, and is a richer outcome, I guess. So I'm really interested in what you said, and I would love to see your work.
Yeah. I just want to reiterate that's ultimately makes you the stronger designer. I feel, because you can pick and choose. You can filter your culture through this Swiss grid or anything like that. And what would that look like? It would probably look new. It'd probably look different. You know, that's my approach, and I'm glad that you understood that. And again, I think it's really hard to get your brain out of like it has to be one way or it can't be this way because it has to be this way. You can do whatever you want. There's no rules.
Yep.
I mean, art in general, the evolvement of art was basically how it got inspired by other cultures, and then it evolved to something new, and then a whole school was created. But I am gonna have to leave in 5 minutes. But I really was fascinated by what you said about art was mostly a necessity in your culture. It wasn't for the sake of showing art or for the sake of art. I would like for you to elaborate more on this, like how did it evolve? What do you mean by that? Because it's very interesting to me that art was not the purpose of art was not just to show art to people or inspire people that way. It was something else, and it's very fascinating.
Yeah, I think one or a couple examples, like one being a Navajo sand painting. I'm sure you've seen pictures of that before, or maybe even seen some actual sand paintings before, but within those are for ceremony and those are for prayer. And again, they're not made to last forever. They're literally grains of sand that at the end of the ceremony you wipe away because you're done utilizing that for that specific purpose. And even the same with like textiles, like Navajo weavings, those now that's turned into art. Like that's high art, that's valuable art. But at the time, it's like those weavings, you sang a song, you wove, you did those things, but for yourself as a family, like you needed that because you needed textiles, you needed a dress, you needed something like that. And that's what I mean by it was a necessity and it wasn't art for art's sake.
It's beautiful.
Thank you, Ryan. Daniela, please.
Do you now consider any of your pieces to have that purpose and alignment somehow when you start or when you think of something new? Do you have that in the back of your mind that it has to have a purpose, or do you just do art for the sake of art?
I do art. I do a bit of both. Um, I often think about, again, these big ideas of, uh, am I making Navajo art? Am I appropriating my own culture? Like there's an element of that I get really scared of, is like, if I combine 70s airbrush style with, like a Navajo design, am I appropriating my own culture? But then I also argue with myself, I'm not, because I'm Navajo and I'm inherently making Navajo art. And to answer your question, no, I don't always do it for a purpose, but on some level, I feel like I do. I know that's kind of contradicting, but
Right.
I think
Because
for the
what
sake
if
of
that
making something new.
what if that design then went into a t-shirt, right? You said you'd like to do apparel. So that thought process of you saying, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna create this, but then it's also gonna go somewhat onto a t-shirt. That's the interesting part of how you come across that.
Yeah, and I am careful on what I choose to put out there. If I put a symbol that means a lot to my people, I'm not going to sell that. I'm not going to put it
Right.
on a t-shirt for people to wear. Um, and again, I think there's a responsibility as a person of color, as a person who comes from a rich culture. There is a responsibility of you knowing what is right and what's wrong in terms of symbols and icons that you can utilize. And I try to do my best to learn about that from elders and and it's hard. It's hard to be a person coming from a rich culture where there's intention and meaning behind every single thing,
Right.
and what you can choose and not to choose to draw or to sell or to whatever,
Yeah, makes sense.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Ryan, it's been a
Mhm.
great interview. We really appreciate your time and your insights. I'm going to ask you to leave us your social networks so people can check your art and your music, because Ryan is also a musician. And he also got married last week. So congratulations again.
Congratulations.
Thank you. You can find me at FM Ryan on anything: Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. I'm not super active on all of those, just FYI. And then you can find me on my website, which is fmryanart.com. And music, I play country music. I'm not sure if anyone are country music
I
fans
like
around
it.
here. But I that's a whole nother discussion of like culture appropriation and things like that, because Navajo people have been playing country music forever. Like I would even argue Navajo people have been playing country music longer, if not longer, than like other artists have. It's been around forever, and there's definitely a space for it. And I'm trying to do my best, just like my art. I'm trying to do my best to, scream to the world that Navajo people have had country music forever, and there is a place for indigenous folks to have country music. It's not, because country music has been dominated by, white men for so long that maybe there's other stories we can hear from Black, Brown, Asian folks that make country music.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, thanks again. It's been fascinating.
Yeah.
Truly appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate talking to you guys. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all. And catch you next week with another Moya Talk. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye. You too.